Hi everybody! Wow, so you haven't seen me in a while. The last video I posted was right before COVID hit, and obviously all of our lives changed in really big ways because of it. The pandemic contributed to a huge amount of stress at my job, and as you can see from the title of the video, I lost my job about a week ago. I was let go. And I'm not upset about it. Being let go released me from a months-long fight for safety of staff. I was crying from stress and worry daily. I was having nightmares every single night. And especially toward the end of my employment, I was being gaslit and micromanaged in an attempt to push me to my limit. When I was let go a week ago, today's Monday, I was let go last Monday, I had so many thoughts constantly running around in my head. A lot of it was just a haze. I was trying not to forget anything, and I was just constantly thinking about what I had went through over the course of 6 to 7 months. I started writing things down, and it started with just a list of bullet points as chronologically as I could remember of just situations and events that happened. And then over the next couple days, I was talking with other people that I worked with, people that went through the same things that I did, and reading old text messages and really kind of filling in the gaps and remembering a lot of what I went through, because it was a lot. As I started writing out what I went through, I realized that it was something that needed to be talked about. I know for a fact that I am not the only victim of corporate greed, and I want to share my unique perspective regarding COVID safety and conversations I was a part of as a former member of corporate staff in a business. We all know that CEOs are almost always evil, and we all know that the working class is exploited and their labor is used to make other people wealthy. This is just a fact. We all know it, but I saw it firsthand. I was part of conversations with people that were doing this, and I want to share that. I'm gonna read what I wrote about my experience just because I don't want to miss any details, but for context, I was formerly the director of stores for a dry cleaning company. I was the director of the Minnesota stores, so I oversaw 7 locations pre-pandemic, and it went down to 5 to the point that I left. I guess district manager is also an adequate title for what I don't know. My official title was director of stores. Technically, the business that I worked for had, I don't know, I might be using present tense or past tense. That might, alternate just because it's like, so fresh that I'm not part of it anymore. But technically they have less than 500 employees, which makes them a small business, but they're pretty successful. They had 7 locations in Minnesota, I think 10 in California. They had 2 in Texas, which I think Texas is totally shut down. So they're pretty successful. I will not be saying the name of the business that I worked for. I will also be changing all of the names, so I will be using names, but they won't be people's real names. If anybody tries to speculate which business I worked for, I will not confirm or deny anything. I just want to share my experience that I went through since the pandemic started from my own perspective. So I'm gonna just start reading what I wrote. It's kind of a stream of consciousness, but first of all, I don't want to miss any details. Second of all, I can get kind of emotional about this topic because there were quite a few things that happened that just like bewildered me or made me feel like deeply horrible. I was part of conversations in which employees were discussed as if they aren't actually people, that they're disposable. So I'm just going to read what I wrote because I wrote it out pretty much like matter of fact. Here's what happened. and I'm probably not going to deviate from it. So I'll be looking down quite a bit, but I'm going to try not to just recite it. In April, at the start of the pandemic and the lockdown in Minnesota, the company temporarily closed down the stores because staying open is like lighting money on fire. They did not close down for safety reasons. There is a loophole that makes dry cleaning an essential business somehow. I don't want to get into that, but it was for money. The Minnesota stay-at-home order stated that meetings should not take place in person unless absolutely necessary, but that did not stop the VP, Marcus, from forcing in-person meetings of a group of 5 twice per week. The order also stated that if a person could do their job from home, they must be allowed to do so. Marcus forced the route manager, Tammy, to work at the store and interact with drivers and cleaning lab staff, even though she is immunocompromised and could easily get her work done remotely. At the end of April, with COVID cases rapidly increasing in Minnesota, the CEO, Dane, made the decision to reopen the St. Louis Park store with a 1-week notice. The decision was made without me, and I was the last to know. Even the store manager knew about the decision before I did. I am the store manager's boss. Was the store manager's boss. During the first few weeks of the lockdown, Dane and Marcus hosted weekly Zoom meetings for all staff to be able to attend. After the decision was made to open St. Louis Park, Marcus announced the reopening on Zoom. I asked him to turn on anonymous messaging so people could voice their concerns, but I did not know that meant that the messages would be sent directly to him and nobody else could see it. He had multiple people send in questions and concerns about safety that all went ignored. He was asked about how we can prevent dirty clothing from coming in contact with our own clothing, how we will ensure every interaction is no contact, and he was asked to reconsider the store hours so there would only be a single shift per day. He ignored all of it. There were also multiple people who voiced concerns regarding their and their family's pre-existing health risks, which also went ignored. The only thing Marcus ever said about safety is, as long as you're wearing gloves and a mask, you should be okay. This meeting showed clearly that the safety of staff was an afterthought from the very start, and it was the last meeting Marcus ever hosted. He told me to host them from that point forward. This is when I began to take safety into my own hands because I saw that Dane and Marcus did not think or care about it. I ordered enough lab coats for each employee at the St. Louis Park store to be able to have 2, a rotation of 1 to wear for the day and 1 that is being cleaned at the cleaning lab. Marcus wanted employees to use their employee cleaning stipend to get the lab coats cleaned. But after I pushed back and said that we should be providing PPE due to this being a high-risk job, he backed down. I asked to be able to raise everyone's wages for hazard pay, but that got denied. At this point, it was almost impossible to find masks and gloves to provide the employees. We were using a backstock of gloves that we had pre-pandemic, and luckily we had some surgical masks from a couple of months previously when we needed like a couple of them. Only 1 employee was willing to return to work when St. Louis Park reopened, but we had 3 shifts to fill. Nobody else felt that it was safe enough to return to work due to the state of the pandemic. This meant that I was going to have to work 7 days a week for the foreseeable future, which Marcus and Dane were totally fine with. Neither of them offered to help, and they both rejected my suggestion to only open with a single shift per day. On the first day back, I felt very unsafe due to the nature of the job. It is customer facing and you have to handle dirty clothing. It is dry cleaning, customers bring their dirty clothes to you and you have to handle it closely and inspect it. It's not a quick process. You have to basically cuddle with dirty clothing. It took me crying on the phone to Marcus for him to agree to keep the lobbies closed and to allow us to hold the dirty clothing for 24 hours before touching it. At this time, there weren't any tests done to see how long the virus lasted on fabric, but 24 hours was agreed on to be safe. We were easily able to service customers with the closed lobby because we already had no contact options since before the pandemic. Customers used a drop box to drop off their clothing, and they called the store to process the pickup. Once the 24-hour hold and the closed lobby were put into place, I was able to get the other 2 shifts covered because people felt safe enough to return. In early May, it was announced that the Minnesota stores had been franchised to Chase and Linda Jones. I didn't really write about who they are or my first impressions of them because I wanted my writing, my thing, to be just factually what happened, series of events. But Chase and Linda are, I'm gonna go off script here just because I feel like my first impression of them ended up being correct. They are the definition of white privilege. Linda hadn't worked in over 5 years because she was a stay-at-home mom, even though they had a nanny that actually took care of their kids. These people had a stupid amount of money. And they are also close friends with the CEO and founder of the company I worked for. I believe I changed his name to Dane for this story, but Dane comes from a stupid amount of money as well. The company started because his daddy gave him $1 million, literally $1 million. So it's been speculated amongst many people that Chase and Linda also come from money, really rich people, and very, very shallow people. Because the reopening of the St. Louis Park store was so rushed, I got feedback from staff that they wanted a longer notice before returning to work. People needed time to mentally prepare to no longer be isolating and to return to a high-risk job. I also needed time to be able to find enough PPE and cleaning supplies. I asked Chase and Linda for a 2-week notice for future store reopenings, which they promised to give me. They never gave me a 2-week notice for any reopenings. They began rapidly reopening stores, and some reopened with less than a 1-week notice, which meant that those stores did not have lab coats or cleaning supplies for the first few days back. This is the first time the store staff as a whole felt like the new owners, Dane and Marcus, didn't care about them. Almost a quarter of employees chose to quit instead of coming back to work because they felt like it wasn't safe to return, they felt like it was too soon, or they felt like the company did not care about them. In early June, on a Thursday, I was told that all of the lobbies were going to have to be open on the following Monday. This decision was not based on the state of the pandemic, because cases were still rising. There had been no customer complaints at all, and the closed lobbies were the #1 reason why the employees we had felt safe enough to return. We did not have any plexiglass, social distancing floor stickers, and not nearly enough PPE or cleaning supplies. It was impossible for me to find all of the things we needed to open the lobbies safely in 3 days, especially with 2 of those days being the weekend when nothing would be shipping. I begged them for just 1 more week, which got rejected. Instead, Chase bought plexiglass on Sunday and brought it to 1 store. The plexiglass was only chest height, and only 1 store opened with it anyway. I ordered proper sizes, but the stores didn't have any plexiglass protection for the week and a half it took for them to be delivered. I was also not permitted to order gloves because Chase thought it was too expensive. Instead, he wanted to look for a wholesaler to get gloves cheaper. Dane's solution to the lack of cleaning supplies was to provide 1 can of Lysol spray to each store. It was painfully obvious that safety was the least of their concerns. I asked Chase and Linda about what our response would be if cases continued to rise and how we would keep employees safe. I suggested that we close the lobbies back down if cases continued to rise, which Linda promised would happen. She went as far as to say that none of the signs on the doors pointing toward the drop box and asking customers to call for a pickup would be taken down, so it'll look like lobbies are still closed, but if a customer tried to open the door, it would be unlocked. She said this would make it easier to keep the doors locked again if need be. Despite all this, cases continued to rise, but they never agreed to close the lobbies back down. Jumping ahead in the story, eventually they told me that they would never close the lobbies back down and they never intended to. This was when I realized that they never followed through on anything they promised, and they never will. When the lobbies opened back up, another quarter of our staff quit. The Edina store was down to just the manager, and we were filling the rest of the shifts with myself and float staff who were working when they could. I warned them that people were going to quit if they opened the lobbies, but they didn't care. I tried to make the lobbies as safe and socially distant as possible. I set up a drop-off station with customer forms and a large bin for them to place their bags into, so the drop-off process could still be no contact. I set up the lobbies so customers would not come near the front counter. Pickups can easily be done with the customer standing outside or near the front door, so this way employees could be at a safe distance. At this time, a study was published proving COVID to be airborne. I might still have a link to it somewhere. If I can find it, I'll link it down below. At this time, I still thought they meant it when they said that they were willing to close the lobbies back down, so I shared the study with Dane, Marcus, Chase, and Linda and asked them to reconsider opening the lobbies, which got rejected. A couple weeks after the lobbies opened, Dane, Marcus, Chase, and Linda came into the Edina store and tried to change as much of the no contact process as possible. They took the signs off the doors pointing toward the drop box and asking to call for pickups, even though Linda said that they would not do that. The reason Dane gave for making this decision is because he doesn't like signs and he doesn't think people want to read them. Yeah. They also removed the drop-off station and the bin, and they rearranged the lobby so customers would come right up to the front counter. During this interaction, it was clear that they were not concerned about safety. All of the decisions they were making were due to their own personal preference. I don't want to get mad. I'm trying not to get mad. So far, none of the customers had complained about the process. In fact, some customers thanked us and said that they were glad that we were being safe. Dane, Marcus, Chase, and Linda wanted things to feel normal, even though what they were doing was removing safety. At one point, Dane went across the street to a fast food place for a soda, and when he came back, he said, "I was just at that place," and it was like nothing was different. He was saying that as if it was a good thing. I told him that would be alarming to me because things should be different. We are in a pandemic. There should be safety measures in place. And if I walked into a business where it felt normal and nothing was different, I would turn around and walk out. Dane said that I was projecting my fear of COVID onto the customers and that employees should just feel safe with plexiglass. Despite the scientific evidence showing that any customer with COVID will release the virus into the air. Okay, my camera overheated, so let's just keep going. I lost my place. Despite the scientific evidence showing that any customer with COVID will release the virus into the air and around a single plexiglass barrier, I tried to warn them that changing things and removing safety would cause more issues, but they did not care. We operated with the lobbies at full contact for almost a week before everyone who actually worked in the stores put things back to how I set them up initially. Customers were walking right up to staff members and sometimes without a mask, and were trying to hand dirty clothing directly to the workers. Customers were more confused about the process because we were still waiting 24 hours before touching any clothing, so it made more sense to everyone to keep the lobbies and the drop-off process no contact. So things were put back. In early July, there was an outbreak of COVID at the St. Paul store. Initially, when they decided to reopen the lobbies, I asked them what their response to this situation would be because it would mean that customers and potentially other staff members had been exposed. They said, "We'll cross that bridge when we come to it." I told them that we needed a plan if they insisted on opening the lobbies and adding to customer and staff exposure. I suggested that in the event of, oh my God. So I suggested that in the event of one of our staff members catching COVID, we should close the store for 24 hours to deep clean, provide testing for any employees who had contact with the individual, and notify every customer who came into the store for the 2 weeks previous to the diagnosis. They agreed at the time that my suggestions were the right thing to do, but when we inevitably had an outbreak, they went back on everything. The store did not close down for cleaning. They said that they would not be paying for COVID tests for employees, even though Marcus promised it to everyone a few months previously on a Zoom call. He promised that the company would pay for COVID tests, and the Jones agreed. They decided not to do that. They decided to cover it up. They did not notify any customers, and they did not want employees to know about it. The only way people found out was through myself and other workers suggesting that people get tested. Around this time, Dane, Marcus, and the Jones fired the route manager / concierge, Tammy. She was trying to negotiate fair pay for the route drivers, who historically only worked on commission. Because business was slower, they were earning less than minimum wage. Tammy fought hard for fair pay and was eventually let go due to budget cuts, but everyone knew it was because she would not back down on that issue. Eventually, they ended up paying the drivers an hourly wage until their commission reached a higher level, which is exactly what Tammy was trying to do. Linda took over the job of route manager, but she didn't actually do anything. Instead, she delegated the entire workload out to multiple different people. She tried to give the concierge responsibilities to the St. Paul and Edina store managers. These new responsibilities included having large volume of phone calls routed to stores, managers having to respond to customer questions via email, and learning the entire route process in order to answer the questions. Linda also made the marketing director perform route manager duties without asking her, which is way outside of her job description. After a few weeks, she hired 2 new people to do Tammy's job, so I guess they found room in the budget for 2 new people. At this point, I was mostly only meeting with the Joneses. Dane and Marcus were seemingly trying to be more hands-off and let the Jones run the business. After multiple conversations and meetings where they made me promises without following through, and where my concerns for safety were shot down and pushed aside, I conducted an anonymous survey of store staff. We were seeing high cases of COVID in Minnesota, and we still didn't have a mask mandate, so many customers would come in without masks. We had lost half of our staff due to safety concerns, which I had warned the Joneses about before opening lobbies, but they didn't care. I wanted to give a voice to the staff so the Jones, Dane, and Marcus could understand that the safety concerns weren't just my own. They were sending a message to everyone that they think workers are disposable. The decisions being made caused workers to feel like they were being sacrificed for profit. I thought an anonymous survey would allow people to say how they feel directly to the people making decisions without fear of retaliation. The survey was simple. It was 5 questions. First one, yes or no, do you feel safe? The remaining 4 were open-ended. What are some safety measures you're glad that we have? What are some ways we can improve safety? How can we have a safe and welcoming experience for staff and customers? And just general comments or concerns. So the survey results showed that 100% of store staff felt unsafe at work. They unanimously agreed that the best safety measure we had in place was the closed lobbies, but the second best was the 24-hour hold of garments before detailing. They all asked for the lobbies to close back down, and many expressed frustration with the new owners and said they feel like the Jones don't care about their lives as much as the potential for more money. The results were not surprising to me at all, and I had been trying to get these points across for months. Initially, Chase seemed willing to listen. Somehow he was surprised by some of the answers in the survey, but for a couple of days I thought he might actually make some changes that were being asked of him. Instead, Dane, Marcus, Chase, and Linda got mad at me for conducting the survey, and they ignored everything that people said. Dane told me that I needed to apologize to the Jones because some things in the survey made Linda sad. Dane tried to make me feel bad for Chase and Linda by saying that they bought the business right before the pandemic hit and things have been hard for them, as if the pandemic hadn't been hard on everyone. He said that, his exact words, Linda didn't think she'd have to work. And they have 3 kids to take care of. At this point, I knew that Chase and Linda were objectively bad people. Linda's sob story about being a working mom is bullshit because Chase makes enough money for her to not have to work at all and have a nanny taking care of her kids and to own a brand new luxury vacation home in Mexico and buy a dry cleaning business. She hadn't worked in over 5 years and she wasn't even doing real work at this company. She was playing businesswoman and gambling with people's lives. During this conversation, Dane asked me to debate with him about opening the lobbies versus keeping them closed. I brought up the study proving COVID to be airborne, and he told me, "You can believe whatever science you want to, and I'll believe what I choose to believe." He was trying to make a point that there are scientists and doctors downplaying COVID as a plandemic, so therefore he would not take any science I brought into consideration because it goes both ways. I tried to make a moral argument that we should not be putting our employees' health at an unnecessary risk just for the potential for more revenue. We had no customer complaints and business had been growing while we had closed lobbies, so it did not make sense to open the lobbies even from a business perspective. Dane actually agreed that having open lobbies was a high-risk, low-reward move, but he would not back down. He said the lobbies were going to stay open unless the government added restrictions on customers entering businesses. Linda Jones came to have a conversation with me about the situation the next day. She spent about 3 hours putting words into my mouth and trying to get me to say that I'm not equipped to lead the store staff. She was mad that I conducted the survey because she thought that they had already made it clear that the lobbies were never going to close back down. I reminded her about when she said they were willing to close the lobbies back down. I also told her that I had been bringing the topic up at every single meeting and trying to get them to understand how employees were feeling, but that they always changed the subject. She said that them changing the subject meant no, and I should have just understood that. She also accused me of trying to make her look like the bad guy and trying to make myself look like the good guy to staff. In reality, I had only ever repeated what she said to other employees. I did not hide the fact that I was fighting for safety, but the Jones kept denying it. I never lied about her or Chase or Dane or Marcus to anyone. The staff decided for themselves that she's the bad guy because she is the bad guy. During this conversation, I brought up the fact that we've already lost half of our staff and we will continue to lose people as long as her and her husband keep running the business with no regard for the health or safety of employees. She said she'd rather have everyone quit and to hire all new people than to add any more safety measures than we had at the time. Around the same time, the employee working at the Lyndale store had a customer come in without a mask on. There was a mask mandate for the city of Minneapolis at this moment, and when asked to put a mask on, the customer coughed on the employee. In response to this, he decided to take his health and safety into his own hands. He locked the doors of the lobby and only let people inside if they had a mask on. He had signs on the doors explaining the no contact service options that we had been using when the lobbies were closed, and he still serviced customers. He didn't tell me or anyone else that he was doing this, and he ran the store this way for a few days before Linda found out. When she realized what was going on, she tried to make me fire him. I refused because I did not feel that what he was doing was wrong. He was still operating the store, but he was doing it safely. Chase Jones ended up firing him. At the end of July, Linda violated HIPAA and ADA laws by sending out an email to multiple people with a list of employees' names who either had COVID or thought they might have had COVID and had to get a test for it. Dane admitted that she broke the law by doing this. She was reported to OSHA, DLI, and HIPAA, but they did not do anything about it. In the beginning of August, after months of being asked to switch the store hours to a single shift for safety, they did it. They didn't make the decision based on safety, however, they did it because the PPP loan ran out and they were trying to save money on labor costs. This provided some relief because it was very difficult to cover the shifts in the stores just due to people quitting, and hiring people to work at a dry cleaner during a pandemic was almost impossible. The biggest issue with this change was that the store hours went from 10:30 to 6:30, which is a full 8 hours. This meant that the managers, which were the only people left working, were going to have to work overtime with no additional pay unless they clocked in right at 10:30 and clocked out right at 6:30. And they were doing this until around mid-September when Linda Jones started micromanaging the time clock reports and began requiring managers to arrive 15 minutes early and work more than an hour of overtime for free per week. The reason she gave for this was to give them enough time to open the store, but myself and the store managers brought up the fact that the only thing they needed to do to get the store open was unlock the door and turn the lights on. It takes about a minute, not 15. Chase and Linda said that they are expected to work overtime because they're salaried. I believe that they were just trying to squeeze as much free labor out of the workers as they could. The other issue that came up when switching the stores to a single shift was that the workload doubled for the managers. Suddenly, the St. Louis Park, Edina, and St. Paul store managers were unable to complete everything they needed to do on a daily basis. The St. Paul and Edina managers could not do the concierge responsibilities because they were too busy. I brought this up to Linda, but she said, her own words, "It's okay, we'll just spread them thin." She ended up getting mad because they were not answering concierge emails, and she did not believe me when I said they were too busy. She sent one of her friends to the Edina store to train the manager, but her friend quickly noticed that he was too busy, and I guess Linda believed her friend because it wasn't mentioned again. One of the employees who worked in the same location as their offices was exposed to COVID through a close family member that they share a bedroom with. That employee works closely with Dane, Marcus, and the Jones every single day, which meant that they were also exposed to COVID. Instead of isolating, getting tested, and working remotely until they knew they were negative, they continued working at the office with store staff, drivers, and cleaning lab staff. They also chose to visit other stores that week to interact with all staff, and at times they opted out of wearing a mask around workers, including me. When I brought up my concerns about being exposed to COVID and knowing they were exposed, Linda told me they would not isolate themselves until they had symptoms. Luckily, nobody caught COVID due to their irresponsibility at this time. I reported them to OSHA with pictures of them, date stamped, violating the Minnesota mask mandate, but they did nothing about it. People would call in sick a lot as a precautionary measure, which I supported. Unfortunately, this meant that I would end up covering shifts last minute. We lost so many of our employees due to safety concerns that we didn't have a lot of on-call staff. Linda would reprimand me for covering shifts and tell me that I needed a plan B for when someone calls out, but I told her that I am the plan B, and that I tried to warn her multiple times about people quitting due to her decisions. She told me to hire more float staff, but she didn't seem to understand that people aren't looking for jobs that can't guarantee hours. She would not allow me to hire anyone with a set amount of hours scheduled because she didn't want to pay for labor that she didn't think she needed. The Edina store was so busy that they actually did need a second person to help out part-time, and I asked if I could hire someone who would be scheduled for 3 small shifts per week at Edina, but could serve as a float if someone calls in sick. She rejected that request, and I ended up being the person working at Edina 3 times per week, which Linda also had a problem with. In regards to the Edina store, they were the second busiest after the St. Louis Park store, who was getting part-time help. Linda and Marcus were constantly gaslighting myself and the store manager by saying that Edina wasn't busy enough to need additional help. First, they asked me to fill in a capacity calculator to break down the amount of work the manager had versus the amount of hours for the store. When the calculator came back showing a negative amount of hours, proving that they needed more help, Marcus and Linda moved to focusing on the amount of pieces being detailed. When that metric proved that the manager was too busy, they moved to looking at sales per hour, which was low. I argued that not only are sales low because of a pandemic, but sales per hour actually just shows the revenue or the amount of pickups leaving the store, while it was actually incoming orders that showed how much work was being done. I went back and forth on this with them for months about the St. Louis Park, Edina, and St. Paul stores, which all had too much work for one person to do. I had approved the St. Louis Park and St. Paul stores to have more help behind the backs of the Joneses because they needed it. The Edina store did not have an available person to help out, which is why I was the one to do it. Linda spent the last couple months of my employment micromanaging me. I believe she was trying to push me to my limit because she would pick apart everything that I did in a way that was entirely unnecessary. For example, she spent weeks trying to get me to change a document in a way that would literally just move one piece of information from one line up to another. It wouldn't have changed anything about the document or anything about the information that was in the document. So I refused to do it because I refused to be micromanaged down to the smallest insignificant details. While all of this was going on since July 25th, Minnesota issued a statewide mask mandate. Customers were required by law to wear a mask if they wanted to come inside. Unfortunately, this brought out a lot of anti-maskers who seem to want to come inside just to argue. This is obviously a huge safety risk because anti-maskers are more likely to catch COVID by not taking precautions, and they're more likely to spread it because of that too. When they come into the store, they are prepared to argue. They want to argue. They stand in the store yelling and fighting and greatly increasing the risk to employees. I suggested to Dane that we have a company policy on top of the mask mandate requiring customers to wear masks, and he agreed. Despite the mandate and the company policy, I had an incident with an anti-masker who refused to wear a mask. I informed her that we have a company policy and a state mandate requires her to wear a mask if she wants to be serviced inside. If anti-maskers refuse to wear a mask, they can use the drop box or wait outside while we complete their order. The anti-masker stood in the lobby, yelling, as they do, and Chase Jones came out, apologized to the customer, and told her it's okay if she doesn't want to wear a mask. Not only was that a violation of the mask mandate for him to do this, it was so disrespectful to me. He said, right in front of me, that my safety is not as important as appeasing an anti-mask Karen. And to him, my life is worth less than the $40 she was probably gonna spend. I reported him to OSHA for the mask mandate violation, but they did nothing about it. I got in trouble for the incident because we cannot ask customers to put on a mask. I informed them that yes, we can ask customers to wear a mask. In fact, we are legally required to do so, otherwise the business could be fined for violating the Minnesota mask mandate. I reminded them that Dane, the CEO, approved of a mask requirement policy. I also reminded them that we are in a pandemic and we should be empowering workers to know how to navigate the anti-mask situations. I told them that I would be hosting an all-staff meeting educating everybody on the mask mandate, mask safety, and make sure that everyone is comfortable speaking about these topics to anti-maskers and keeping themselves safe in that situation. Linda told me, verbatim, let's put a pin in this because there are other things that take priority over safety. Those are her exact words. There are other things that take priority over safety. The thing that she thought took priority over safety in that meeting was just another argument about the workload in stores and the fact that she didn't believe that the stores were busy enough to need help. That's more important than safety. Once again, out of nowhere, they began talking about removing safety. This time they wanted to remove the 24-hour hold that we had in place before detailing garments. They said it was because they didn't want customers to have to wait so long before getting their clothing back, but we did not have a single customer complaint about this. They were not considering the state of the pandemic, which was still getting worse by the day. Minnesota is part of the worst area of the country, but that did not even cross their mind. There was also finally a study done on fabric, which showed that COVID can live up to 72 hours on clothing. I brought up the fact that 24 hours might not even be a long enough hold, and that staff had said that many times that the hold is the best safety measure we have. Chase ended that conversation by saying that him and Linda will discuss it on their own. That was the last meeting I had with them. They ended up canceling the all-staff mask safety meeting and firing me instead of letting me educate the employees on how to keep themselves safe. Linda fired me by saying that I'm too caring of the staff, and that's just not what they want. I had no write-ups, no warnings. I had a history of exceptional reviews, and just a few weeks previously, I was told by the vice president of the company that I was the best store director they ever had. The official reason they gave me for my termination was performance of stores. I asked Linda to elaborate on that and for any specific examples because it was so vague. She did not provide me with any examples of anything I had ever done wrong. The stores were growing and doing well. Truthfully, it was not a valid reason for termination. I believe I was terminated for speaking out, for pushing back, and for advocating for safety when it was clear to me that safety was their lowest priority and they were determined to profit by exploiting and endangering staff. The same day they let me go, they also fired the Edina store manager. He was another person who regularly spoke up in favor of safety. He has a background in science, which I think scared them. They could not argue against safety or pretend like COVID isn't real when they were around him. The official reason they gave him for termination was performance management, even though he also had no history of any warnings or write-ups whatsoever. His performance was consistently exceptional. It is not a coincidence that they fired the two loudest advocates for safety at the same time. An hour before I was let go, I saw an email that they had definitively decided to remove the final safety measure that I had in place, which was the 24-hour hold. Since the pandemic started, the company that I worked for has had a clear history of punishing people who were trying to protect employees. It started with Tammy, and then it happened to myself and the Edina store manager. Every decision they made was entirely in the interest of profits, and when faced with the reality of what they were putting workers through, they denied it and got rid of the people that were bringing it to their attention. I know that that company that I worked for is by far not the only company operating this way. Corporate greed has contributed to many of the COVID deaths of workers being forced to work in unsafe conditions. Non-essential businesses are open. Restaurants are allowing people to dine in inside without masks on. Schools are open for in-person learning and teachers are getting sick and dying. Hospital staff aren't being provided with enough PPE and they're being criminally overworked. Large corporations treat workers like cattle and work them dry and sacrifice them for profit, and small businesses like the one that I worked for follow suit. There are multiple small businesses in the Twin Cities that are still operating at 100% no contact today, and they're thriving. It is a viable option, but when CEOs and business owners think they can make a couple $100 more, but someone has to die, they'll do it. COVID has proved that they will do it, and our government allows them to do it. Our government allows businesses to risk killing workers. OSHA was notified 3 different times from multiple people, not just myself, about 3 different instances of violations, and they did nothing about it. The pandemic has shined a massive light on the capitalist crisis that can't be ignored anymore. People are facing mass evictions and homelessness. People don't have access to adequate health coverage. People are being forced to choose between going back to work and catching COVID or starving, which both could result in death anyway. And Jeff Bezos increased his wealth by $70 billion since the pandemic started. The money's there. The money exists. It's just being hoarded by a small amount of people, and those people are being protected by a nefarious government. What I went through is a symptom of a corrupt system that needs to change, and I hope the people watching this understand that they can be a part of a movement that creates change, but it has to start with them. Corporate members of the company you work for will literally let you die unless you stop them. I hope you understand that the work you do produces wealth, and you are more entitled to that wealth than the CEO of the company who just looks at spreadsheets all day. I hope you want to do something about that. So what am I doing now? I'm unemployed. I'm gonna be collecting unemployment, which will pay my bills, but I'm gonna just have to be pretty careful with my spending. I'll probably just be eating rice and beans for a while, but I deserve a break. COVID is the worst it's ever been in Minnesota, and I'm living in the area of the Midwest, which is the current epicenter of the pandemic in the country, so I'm not really in a rush to return to a job where I have to interact with the public. I've started learning how to do embroidery, and I love it, and I've been spending a lot of time with my amazing boyfriend and my cat. I'm happy, and I have so much less stress now that I'm not fighting with anti-science, greedy, privileged assholes on a daily basis. I'm gonna be passively looking for safer jobs, but who knows what the world is gonna look like in 6 months. I mean, the election might stir things up. Maybe there will be a social revolution. One can only hope. I just hope that everybody is doing okay, because I know that I am not the only person that went through something like this. I think everybody's feeling this. Just remember that we are in this together, and we can unite, and we can bring change. Things don't have to suck, but you just might have to fight a little bit for things not to suck. I'll probably do some regular videos now since I've got nothing but time. I might come back. So yeah, I guess I'll see you soon. Bye.